Have you ever wondered why so often you seem to be your own worst enemy? Why, even when you want to move forward, there's an invisible force pulling you back. Self-sabotage is this quiet paradox, an inner energy that blocks us from achieving what we desire, even when we strive to keep going. We live in a time where productivity, success, and happiness are presented as mandatory goals. Social media shows us curated versions of life, while we struggle to measure up. And the harder we try, the more we trip ourselves up. Procrastination, sudden fear of failure, that inner voice that criticizes us before we even act. This is all self-sabotage. And though it may seem irrational, there is a deep logic beneath it. It's a mechanism of self-preservation. Carl Jung, one of the greatest explorers of the human psyche, taught us about the shadow. It's not a dark or evil side of our personality, but the parts of ourselves we deny, repress, or reject. The desires, fears, and traits we learn to hide under social pressure or upbringing. And it's precisely this hidden part that manifests as self-sabotage. How many times have you hesitated when you should have acted, criticized yourself when you needed support, or sabotaged opportunities before they even appeared? It's not merely laziness or lack of discipline. It's the shadow revealing itself in subtle ways, trying to protect you from something you're not yet ready to face, or do not yet understand. There's a paradoxical beauty in this dynamic. Every behavior that seems to betray us is, in truth, a signal of what remains unrecognized within. Jung said that the first step toward any deep transformation is self-knowledge, and that requires courage. Courage to look inward and confront what we've been trying to hide. In the modern world, this tension only intensifies. We are pressured to display success, to stay constantly in motion, to craft a flawless image on social media. The more we focus on pleasing the outside world, the more we disconnect from ourselves. Self-sabotage emerges as a quiet reminder. Something within you needs to be seen, accepted, and integrated before any real progress can occur. The paradox of self-sabotage is not a curse, it is an invitation. An invitation to recognize that what we reject, what we try to hide, contains essential clues about who we truly are. Every repetitive pattern that keeps us stuck is, in fact, a doorway pointing us towards self-knowledge. And it is precisely by beginning to listen to these signals that we create space to understand our own steps more deeply. When we become aware of this silent shadow within, we start to see why we so often stand in our own way, and what this can teach us about the path ahead. Inside each of us lies something we often try to ignore: the shadow. Carl Jung did not see it as an enemy, but as an essential part of our psyche, a silent presence influencing our thoughts, feelings, and actions without our awareness. The shadow is not evil, it is simply what we have repressed. Emotions, desires, and traits that don't fit the image we want to project or that society expects of us. When we talk about self-sabotage, the shadow is one of the most crucial pieces of the puzzle. It shows up as procrastination, inner criticism, sabotaging relationships, or fear of taking risks. Everything that seems against us is often just a part of ourselves crying out to be recognized. And the harder we fight against this part, the stronger it becomes, the more persistent our self-destructive patterns grow. Jung believed that integrating the shadow is essential to becoming a complete individual. But what does it mean to integrate the shadow? It doesn't mean getting rid of it, nor turning it into something good. Integrating the shadow means facing what we reject, embracing what we feel ashamed to admit, and beginning to understand the reasons behind our self-sabotaging behaviors. It is realizing that every impulse, fear, or insecurity has a reason for existing, even if it is unconscious. Viktor Frankl, another profound thinker, said that life becomes more bearable when we find meaning even in moments of suffering. From this perspective, self-sabotage is not merely an obstacle, it is a message. It is the shadow signaling that there is something within us that needs attention, something that challenges us to look inward with honesty. In daily life, the shadow appears quietly but persistently. Perhaps it is that surge of anxiety before sending an important project, or the impulse to abandon something meaningful for no apparent reason. Perhaps it is the constant self-criticism, or the tendency to shy away from opportunities out of fear of failure. Recognizing these patterns is not easy, it requires courage, patience, and a judgment-free gaze. Integrating the shadow is not a quick path, it is a gradual process of discovery. Each time we manage to see our hidden parts, we begin to notice patterns that once seemed invisible. We realize that often we are the architects of our own obstacles, but also the only ones capable of transforming them into learning and growth. And it is precisely when we begin to recognize these patterns that the opportunity for transformation emerges. We do not erase our self-sabotage overnight, but we start to understand it, to dialogue with it, to embrace the messages it carries. It is in this quiet, honest internal conversation that we start to glimpse the first signs of freedom. A freedom that does not come from perfection but from self-awareness. By acknowledging the shadow within us, we create space to see that our self-sabotaging behaviors are not a sentence of failure, but a map. A map showing us where to look, what we have yet to understand about ourselves, and how we can transform old patterns into pathways of self-knowledge and emotional maturity. And when we begin to listen to these signals, even subtly, we realize there is more at play than mere internal obstacles. There is a quiet invitation to become whole, to learn to dance with our own shadows, and little by little, to transform what once held us back into creative strength. Often, we feel trapped in invisible cycles, as if we are repeating the same mistakes without moving forward. This silent repetition is the voice of self-sabotage, gently reminding us that there is something within us that has yet to be understood. The first step to breaking this cycle is to recognize the pattern, to notice where, when, and why we block ourselves. Jung's shadow manifests subtly in everyday life. It can appear as procrastination, that persistent doubt before making an important decision, or the impulse to pull back when something truly significant arises. Sometimes it hides in self-criticism, in the excuses we tell ourselves, or in the perfectionism that freezes us. These signals, though uncomfortable, are precious clues. They indicate that we are facing a part of ourselves that has yet to be accepted. Observing these patterns requires honesty. We must stop blaming external factors and turn inward, with a careful, almost scientific gaze, toward our own behaviors. When we identify the moments we sabotage ourselves, we begin to see that these actions do not arise by chance. They have an origin, often rooted in fears, traumas, or deep-seated beliefs carried from early life. The modern world, with its relentless pressure to produce and perform, amplifies these patterns. Social media reminds us daily of others' success. External expectations push us to act in ways that do not always align with our inner selves. It is in this context that self-sabotage finds fertile ground, confusing fear with protection and anxiety with prudence. Recognizing this is essential if we are to avoid falling victim to our own unconscious mechanisms. Jung would invite us to perform a kind of internal archaeology, to investigate our impulses, fears, and repetitive behaviors without judgment. To ask ourselves sincerely, why do I pull back when I should move forward? Why do I criticize myself when I need support? Why do I repeat patterns I know harm me? Each answer, no matter how simple it may seem, is a fragment of the shadow waiting to be acknowledged. This process is neither quick nor easy. It requires patience, attention, and self-compassion. Yet, as we begin to observe our patterns of self-sabotage, something curious happens. They start to lose their power. The simple act of identifying and naming these inner tendencies creates a distance between us and them, opening the door to a new way of relating. And when we start to recognize these patterns, we open the door to something greater, the possibility of transformation. It is not about eliminating our fears or weaknesses, but understanding them, integrating them, and using them as tools for growth. Every self-destructive habit that becomes conscious ceases to be just a silent prison and becomes an invitation to know ourselves more deeply. By acknowledging the signs of self-sabotage, we begin to see the map of our own psyche. A map that, when read with attention and courage, shows not only where we stumble, but also where we can truly flourish, authentically and consciously. It is in this process of careful, almost contemplative observation that we feel the first touch of change, the moment when recognizing our own shadow stops being frightening and becomes a quiet step toward inner freedom. Recognizing patterns of self-sabotage is only the first step. The true challenge begins when we commit to integrating the shadow, embracing what we have tried to deny and transforming these aspects into conscious allies. For Jung, integrating the shadow did not mean eliminating flaws or becoming perfect, but accepting the parts of ourselves that dwell in darkness and learning to live with them. Integrating the shadow requires courage. Courage to face the fears we try to avoid, the emotions we feel ashamed to admit, the desires we judge as unacceptable. And paradoxically, it is in this deep, honest gaze that the power of transformation resides. When we stop fighting against ourselves, we create space to forge a truer relationship with our own psyche. In practice, this can manifest in many ways. We might begin by observing our self-criticism and asking, where does it come from? What hidden need is it trying to satisfy? We can allow ourselves to feel anger without guilt, acknowledge frustration without diminishing ourselves, accept vulnerability without judgment. Each step in this direction diminishes the power of self-sabotage and expands our inner freedom. The shadow also shows itself in our daily decisions. Perhaps you notice yourself consistently pulling back from important opportunities, or repeating harmful patterns in relationships. By integrating the shadow, we learn to recognize these impulses not as failures but as signals. Signals that reveal unresolved aspects of ourselves, calling for attention and compassion. It is in this quiet, ongoing inner dialogue that the shadow stops being an invisible force against us and becomes a guide. Jung believed that confronting one's own shadow is essential to becoming a whole individual. By embracing it, we learn that self-sabotage is not a punishment, but a mechanism that, once understood, can lead us to choices that are more conscious and aligned with our true self. Integrating the shadow also requires consistent practice. It is not a single act but a series of small encounters with ourselves. Each time we allow ourselves to observe without judgment, reflect without blame, or act with awareness even in the face of fear, we transform old self-destructive patterns into steps of growth. And when we manage to integrate these hidden parts of ourselves, something shifts profoundly. The anxiety that paralyzed us gives way to clarity, the fear that held us back becomes learning, the constant self-criticism softens into self-compassion. We begin to realize that by embracing our shadow, we become more whole, more authentic, more capable of acting with freedom and purpose. And it is precisely at this point, when we start turning what once held us back into conscious strength, that self-sabotage ceases to be merely an obstacle. It becomes a silent path to self-knowledge, a bridge between who we were and who we can truly be. And it is by crossing this bridge, even gradually, that we begin to taste the first hints of true inner freedom. When we begin to integrate our shadow, something quiet and powerful occurs. Self-sabotage loses some of its hold over us. What once felt inevitable, the repetitive patterns that frustrated us, now become clear warning signs, invitations to awareness and self-knowledge. To recognize this is to see that within every self-destructive impulse lies an opportunity for growth. Breaking free from self-sabotage does not mean eliminating mistakes, fears, or weaknesses. It means seeing them, understanding them, and learning to walk alongside them without being dominated by them. Jung taught us that true freedom arises from a deep acceptance of who we are, not only the parts we take pride in but also those that scare us. And it is precisely by facing these shadows without running that we become whole. This transformation shows itself in everyday life. Anxiety in the face of important decisions begins to lose its grip. Procrastination becomes a signal, not an obstacle. Inner criticism softens into conscious self-dialogue, and self-compassion takes the place of relentless judgment. Each conscious step strengthens our ability to act according to our values, desires, and dreams, rather than being held hostage by fears and unconscious habits. The modern world continues to pressure us, offering distractions, comparisons, and external expectations at every turn. But self-awareness, the integration of the shadow, creates an internal space of freedom. A space where we can choose, deliberate, and act more authentically, even amid the uncertainties, frustrations, and challenges of life. It is in this space that self-sabotage ceases to be an enemy and becomes a guide, showing what still needs to be understood, embraced, and transformed. The journey of understanding and integrating our shadow has no defined endpoint. It is a continuous movement, made up of small, silent victories, conscious decisions, and deep self-acceptance. Each moment we allow ourselves to see our hidden parts is a step toward emotional maturity and authenticity. And when we realize we are no longer prisoners of our unconscious patterns, we feel something few experience: a serene freedom built not from the absence of fear, but from the courage to walk with it. It is the feeling of being at peace with oneself, even knowing that failures and challenges will still arise. Because now, every obstacle is also an opportunity for learning, and every shadow is an invitation to integration. Self-sabotage then stops being merely a problem to overcome. It becomes a silent bridge between who we were and who we can truly be. And perhaps the greatest paradox of the human condition is this: what once seemed to hold us back is, in truth, what leads us to freedom. By accepting the shadow that dwells within us and learning to walk alongside it, we realize that each step toward awareness is, at the same time, a step toward our own humanity, whole, imperfect, and profoundly alive. And so, when we look back, we see that every act of self-sabotage was also a a quiet invitation to become more whole, more conscious, and more true to ourselves. And by answering this call, even slowly, we begin to move toward a more authentic life, where freedom is not the absence of fear, but the presence of awareness. If this video resonated with you in any way, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It helps YouTube understand who truly connects with these ideas, allowing them to reach more people who, like you, are seeking meaning, introspection, and self-knowledge.